These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from chapter 1, titled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrist swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence, and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've got a lot on the program today. In our third hour, we're going to get into an extensive discussion about this new moratorium on evictions that a Trump judge just blew up. Congress had appropriated well over $10 billion to help renters, pay their rent and keep landlords whole. And that was supposed to be distributed over the next month or two. The moratorium expired on June 30th. A Trump judge just blew it up, which just completely scrambles the whole thing. We'll get into that in our third hour. In our second hour, Republican voting suppression has metastasized to Florida. Ben Jealous is going to be with us about that. And Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by in our second hour. Is the gig up on the gig economy? And I want to get into my rant from today about how do we stop corporate America from shoving fascism down our throat. But first, with us on the line is Charles Sauer, the libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute. He's also the author of the new book, Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. MarketInstitute.org is the website. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. And Charles, I see that a majority of Democrats in the Democratic caucus have called for the White House to support this TRIPS waiver. This is essentially what it says is that right now Pfizer, for example, just to pick one company, for example, right now Pfizer controls the patent on their product that they developed, and therefore they control who can make it and what it gets sold for. and they can make any kind of profit they want. They just showed a fairly massive profit, $3.5 billion profit just on this drug, and one of the largest corporate profits, or Pfizer profits in their history in this last quarter as a result of this. And what this waiver does through the World Trade Organization's trade agreements is it requires Pfizer to allow other companies in other countries to manufacture this product and pay Pfizer a reasonable profit, which under World Trade Organization rules is around 7% of the revenue, the total revenue for which the product is sold by the generic companies in other countries. So Pfizer isn't losing explicitly. They're not getting anything stolen from them, arguably, but they are losing considerable profit that they could make if they were to hang on to manufacturing and say, no, we're going to dribble this out over 3 years, let a few 100 million people die, but hey, we'll make billions more in profits. So A, any disagreement with how I've described what's going on, and B, whether you disagree or not, your take on it all. Charles Sauer.
I mean, except for your attacks on the companies interspersed, I think that the general facts are correct here. But the main idea here, and the problem is not this pandemic. The problem is the next pandemic, because innovation is what has built the American economy, and it is what built this vaccine and meant that these companies were able to have a vaccine within a day of getting the actual genetic information for what we were facing. And so we were able to actually produce it in a year. I mean, this was amazing stuff. This was the type of progress that nobody could have imagined. And that's because we have a very strong research and development system in the U.S., and we were able to produce it. So if you take away
hang on just a second, Charles. Hang on. Charles, the Pfizer vaccine was not developed in the United States. It was developed by a Turkish immigrant company in Germany based on mRNA technology that's been around for 20 years and that's been applied to SARS viruses like the coronavirus for over 5 years. So, and not one penny of Donald Trump's so-called Operation Warp Speed went to the development of this vaccine. What am I missing here?
Yeah, Warp Speed was definitely oversold. Well, the benefit of Warp Speed was getting paperwork out of the way so that they could go through the approval process faster. The money that was spent was, Trump took more credit than he was due for Operation Warp Speed.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that.
We haven't seen many presidents come in and remove the red tape in the way that he did in this system. So he does deserve some credit in this. But look, when we're talking about intellectual property, we're talking about one of the few rights that is actually in the United States competition. We have a right to free speech, and you have a right to own your intellectual property. So what the Biden administration is doing is taking that away. Look, the European Union rejected this waiver. I believe Germany did, Japan did. Major countries with research and development arms rejected this waiver because it is ridiculous, and it doesn't just hurt the response to COVID, because there's plenty of ways to get vaccines to these countries without running over intellectual property rights. But it hurts,
for example,
investment
please
in the
name
next
one.
Round.
Why aren't we doing that then?
Actually,
I mean, you've got massive meltdowns happening right now in India, which has some of the most advanced and extensive vaccine manufacturing plants in the world. We buy vaccines from India, but they can't make any of these COVID vaccines because every single one of them is covered by a patent that isn't an Indian patent.
These companies have not had any problems licensing out their patents. They haven't had a problem lowering prices and producing things at reasonable amounts. What you talked about in your first response to me was called FRAND, fair and reasonable rates. Well, there's actually ways to set this up. And by going against the market and by just avoiding that, it looks like you're being good to the rest of the country. But what you are doing is undermining the intellectual property system, the research and development system, and more importantly, the investment into that. Look, I've got 3 kids. I like talking about them. I teach them to be inventors. But the idea about inventing is you get that intellectual property. It's one of the rights that the founders put in the Constitution for a reason. It made us different than other countries. And the fact is if we run over those rights now, we hurt tomorrow. And that's the problem that I have with this. That's the problem that the other countries, the European Union, we're not alone in doing this. This is just the Democrats wanting to go after a large corporation that they randomly think is making too much money. And I want them to make money off this. I want them to make money off helping us get out of COVID.
They've already made a fortune. But just to be clear here, Charles, are you saying that if because you know what the World Trade Organization is saying, what the United Nations is saying, what numerous countries are saying, and frankly what the Democrats are saying, and I'm not hearing any pushback from this on the facts, is that if these waivers, which again are not going to hurt Pfizer. Pfizer, instead of making 1,000% profit or a 10,000% profit, is only going to make a 7% profit because of these waivers. But if these waivers don't happen, if these waivers do happen, then countries all over the world can ramp up and start manufacturing vaccine immediately. And this isn't just Pfizer, by the way. This applies to other companies as well. But if these waivers don't happen, we're going to have hundreds of millions of people dead, billions of people infected, and a massive explosion in vaccine mutations that could kill us all. I mean, it just seems like a reasonable deal. Charles, you got the last 20 seconds.
Well, if you look at the innovation, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, ITIF, they're a left-leaning foundation in general. They have 10 ways that we could actually increase vaccine production without this. And they talk about the fact that with this, it's actually going to slow things down. So this isn't just me talking. This isn't just the Republicans talking. There's large countries against this. There's intellectuals on the left that are opposed to this. This is a major issue. And because, look, if you waive the intellectual property rights, these countries that don't have the labor force right now will take time to actually figure out how to implement the
Charles Hartmann Program.
We have that over here
Charles
already.
Sauer. Charles, Sauer, is Twitter handle and marketinstitute.org on the internet. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
And welcome back. Sasha in Kent, Washington. Hey, Sasha, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hey, I have a different take on the AstraZeneca vaccine and this controversy about patents. AstraZeneca said from the get-go, no patent, and also they were pricing their vaccine at anywhere between $5 and $7.50 per shot, and the other two were $25 and $30 per shot. And I think there was corporate dirty tricks to try and smear the AstraZeneca with the blood clot issue that turned out to be totally not significant, but to keep AstraZeneca out of the game. Because they were saying no patent right from the start.
Yeah, I can't confirm the patent right or the prices. I hear you, but I can't confirm that. But in terms of the blood clots, J&J had the same problem. Apparently, with a very, very small subset of young women who have low platelet counts, these vaccines can produce some kind of an immune response that causes blood clots. In a very, we're talking about, a couple of dozen women out of literally, 10 million doses at least between these two companies, between AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. And
less than birth control pills, way less.
Yeah, it's exactly. Birth control pills present a very similar kind of threat or danger. But
in a higher magnitude.
Exactly, but more frequently. But we all consider, or at least women who take birth control pills consider that a threat that's worth having. I think it's a good thing that, frankly, this was all discussed out in the open. I realize that it's feeding some vaccine hesitancy or reluctance, and it's giving the anti-vaxxers a sword. But can you imagine if it had been covered up?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I mean, it would have been portrayed as a scandal and all kinds of things. I think it was handled correctly, but I'm not quite so quick to go to the whole conspiracy thing here, Sasha.
Nobody's hearing about the fact that AstraZeneca never wanted the patent, never took out a patent. That you just don't hear that.
Well,
and that's a fact.
Maybe that's because it's not true. I mean, what makes you think that that's the case?
The sources that I read, and I can't tell you what they were right now.
Well, that's the problem with anything you find on the internet. Yeah, I mean, it may be, and I'd have to fact check that, but I would be astonished if AstraZeneca or any other company decided to throw R&D money into developing a product and didn't want to hold on to the patent. I mean, they could waive the patent, they could offer discounts against the patented product, but to simply say that they're not going to patent it,
I believe it's true, but I'll have to fact check it myself, and in order to stand up and say that, and then if it is, I will get back to one of your sources and say, yeah, I was right.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, or call back, but I just I'm not ready to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole. I'm frankly more concerned just with keeping these things off the market. Thanks a lot for the call, Sasha. It's good to hear from you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma. A serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. So the other topic, welcome back. The other topic I wanted to get into was my rant from this morning, which is how do we stop corporations from shoving what I think you could essentially call, in the classic technical academic sense, fascism down our throats. And this goes, way beyond the authoritarianism of Donald Trump. Basically what it gets into, there's been a lot of talk about, fascism lately and all this sort of thing. And usually it centers around things like Donald Trump sending an armed mob on January 6th to the Capitol to try to kill Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. And in fact, authoritarianism is typically a major piece of what we call fascism. But there's a larger piece that gets very, very little coverage, and that's when a corporation has the power to essentially control government. And government kind of returns the favor by doing things that help out the corporation. Whether it's eliminating preventing a national health care system, no rational gun control laws, no free college, no even the tiniest tax on carbon. These are the kind of things that we would have had in America like they have in other countries long ago, were it not for government being basically under the thumb of for-profit corporations. And, you know, this is, the word fascism comes from this, there's actually it comes from the word fasce, which is an old, it's Latin, but it's an old Roman term. And the fasce was the symbol of the Roman Republic. It was a bundle of sticks with a rope wrapped around it and an axe sticking in the top. And the whole point is that if you break a single stick, if you have a single stick, it's easy to break. If you have a bundle of sticks, it's really hard to break. And so the idea of the fasce as the logo for the Roman Republic, and it's also was early on used as a logo for the American Republic. There's a fasce carved into the speaker's podium in the United States Senate, in homage to the Roman Republic. And the whole point was that a collection of states, 13 states joined together, would be more powerful. They would be that bundle of sticks than a single state, than a single stick. But, you know, when Mussolini came along, he said, you know, we're going to give a whole new meaning to this word. And in fact, he even wrote, he said, the fascist state lays claim to rule in the economic field no less than in others. It makes its action felt through the length and breadth of the country by means of its corporate, social, and educational institutions and in all the political, economic, and spiritual forces of the nation, organized in the respective associations circulating within the state. This is from his labor charter, April 21, 1927. And as a result, you had all these giant corporations, you know, kind of competing for Mussolini's favor and for the government contracts that could flow from Mussolini's favor, not to mention the political power that could grant profits and tax cuts and immunity from being held responsible and all these other kinds of things. And today, as we have, you know, a substantial number of Republican politicians actively working to subvert democracy and establish a kind of merger of corporate and strongman rule, what Mussolini called fascism. These politicians are being supported by a lot of major American corporations. Now, many of those corporations came out and said early on that they were no longer going to give financial assistance to those Republicans who voted to basically make Donald Trump president, even though he lost the election, or supported the insurrection of January 6th. And as you know, the Daily Beast reporting and Judd Legum's reporting found, there are several corporations that have already kind of gone back on that deal. But the real problem here, I think, is the problem that goes back to the Reagan administration, which was when, prior to the Reagan administration, a corporation had multiple responsibilities. They were responsible to their stockholders, of course, and they still are, and that's the only thing they're responsible to anymore. But they also used to be responsible to their local community. They had a responsibility to their employees. And these, I'm talking responsibilities that not only were recognized, kind of as moral imperatives by the leadership of the corporations, but were also in law. They had a responsibility to their customers. They had a responsibility, the management of a corporation had a responsibility to the corporation itself as an entity. And Reagan blew all that up with this Milton Friedman, Robert Bork logic and this literally came out of Robert Bork and Milton Friedman. Robert Bork wrote a book about it. He campaigned for it most of his life, and he finally got it in the Reagan administration, that corporations only should be responsible to their stockholders. So if your only goal is increasing stock price and dividends, in other words, increasing profits, if that's your only goal and you have no other responsibilities, then pretty much anything you can do to get there seems like fair game, right? Including corrupting the political process of a nation, which is what has happened here in the United States. So my question to you, what can we do about this? How do we roll this back? How do we deal with our, quote, fascism problem in the United States? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your calls, thoughts, ideas, suggestions, rants, disagreements on this or Charles or Trips or any of this stuff, you give me a shout. We'll be back. Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many, but they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex, and so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward, and almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists? Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida signed his voter suppression bill proudly on Fox News this morning in a venue that was just a 4-minute drive from Mar-a-Lago. He apparently flew there from Tallahassee just to do this, probably in the hopes that Donald Trump would show up and pat him on the head and, whatever. Trump didn't show up, but nonetheless, the bill got signed. Let me just add that to the pot. I mean, we're now seeing voter suppression going from state to state to state all over the United States. And, the only way to stop this that I can think of, and maybe you have a different idea or you know something I don't, but the only way to stop this is to pass federal legislation saying that states have to, cannot limit the right to vote, basically. They can't mess with the voting mechanism to make it harder for people that they don't think will vote for them to vote. And that's exactly what's going on here. But anyhow, we'll get into that in a little more detail as we continue on down the program. Rama in Williamstown, Vermont. Hey, Rama, the very first producer of the Thom Hartmann Program is on the air with us. Rama. Hey, Rama, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm great.
You and Louise, hello to you guys. Hey, listen, I want to go back to your guest where he was talking, you guys were talking about the vaccines and releasing the patents so that they can go, they can be remanufactured and copied around the world, right? And the guy kept referring to the patents as a right. And the way he was talking about it was putting them on a right, like you go read the amendments, the First Amendment.
He said it's in the Constitution.
It is in the Constitution, but he said it's a right. The intellectual property was a right. So let's assume by intellectual property he's talking about patents and
trademarks,
right?
Yeah. Copyrights.
So the Constitution states very explicitly, and the only place that they're mentioned is under the powers of Congress. And I'm quoting
Article 1, Section 8.
Yep. To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So I just bring this up because the way that he was presenting it, and if people start talking about is I have a right to that patent, I have a right to that copyright. You don't have a right. It's Congress is supposed to promote the progress of science and useful arts, et cetera, by giving you, for temporary uses, the exclusive right to that. So I just say it's an important distinction that can get lost in the greater discussion because we use so much shorthand in our talking that, I don't have a right to a patent, but Congress can give me the exclusive right under a patent.
Rama, this is why you were such a great talk show host in Vermont. You inspired me, and why you were such a great producer when we put this program together in producing the early years of this program. You spot on. What Article 1, Section 8 says is that Congress may pass a law It doesn't grant the right to anybody for a patent or a copyright. It grants Congress the right, because the Constitution, as Barack Obama correctly pointed out in 2008 and was pilloried for by the Republicans, the Constitution is a negative Bill of Rights, essentially. It says these are the things government may not do or may do, you know. And so what Article 1, Section 8, I forget which sentence it is, which paragraph, or paragraph it is in Article 1, Section 8. Maybe you have it in front of you. You could tell me.
But 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It looks like about 8 or 9. It's hard to tell.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. What it says essentially is that Congress may give people this right, and that Congress therefore can define the parameters of that right. And obviously it's not an unlimited right. Congress initially, I think it was in 1891 or 1892 when the first patent and trademark laws were passed, very early in the Republic. We were only a couple of years old, and it was 3 years. And there was a lot of debate about that, and Jefferson thought it should be less than 3 years. There were other people who thought it should be 5 years or 10 years. And a lot of these people were writers, right? They were authors, and this was their stuff that we're talking about. And inventors. Jefferson created over 200 inventions. Ben Franklin over 300. Neither of them ever patented a single one of them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, when you said Jefferson, my mind went right to Ben Franklin on patents, so... Yeah, exactly. Well, Ben Franklin was the big inventor, but Jefferson, he invented the copy machine, essentially. Every letter he made an identical copy of it with this machine that he had built, where as he used his quill pen, there was another quill pen that was on another piece of paper making the same scratches. And he invented a type of desk, and he invented all kinds of stuff. But, Tom, this is this all while drinking hard cider and beer.
I know. And in the case of Jefferson, while being a slave master as well, and we can't forget that either, although Ben Franklin was very much not, and was part of the abolition movement.
I don't want to interfere with your rant here, Tom, because you are one of the wisest people I have ever met in my life. And I say that not as, to compliment you, but just as a mention of how I view you. I don't always agree with you, but I think you're a very wise individual.
But
no,
there's a but that follows that kind of thing.
No, but there isn't. It's just why I hate to interrupt your rant. It's just that I just want to bring people back around. But there's something I threw a but in there. Something you've always talked about, which is if people who want non-Republican oriented radio with money out there really want non-Republican oriented radio, they need to put their money on the line. Rich people need to put up. That's what it boils down to.
And you and I have both been talking about that for a long time to a lot of people, and I wrote a piece about that for The Nation magazine back in December that I refer people to. But what people can do right now, who are listening to us, and and you're kind of thinking like the producer that you and the talk show host that you were for years, but you're absolutely right. Is anybody who's listening to this conversation and thinks America needs more of these kinds of conversations? If you're listening on a commercial radio station or Sirius XM, support their advertisers. Call the advertisers up and tell them that you're doing so because you like the Thom Hartmann program. If you're listening on a non-commercial station on one of our Pacifica affiliates, I know many of them are in fund drive right now, pitch in and help out with their fund drive. If you're watching on Free Speech TV, let them know. If you're watching on YouTube or any of the other social media, share it with people. There are things that people can do that help build the strength of this show, and by building the strength of this show, we set an example for other shows and help build the networks and the stations that we're on in ways that strengthen progressive talk radio. But that's kind of a digression, Rama. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do like you taught me back 15, 18 years ago, I guess it is now. I'm going to move on to the next caller. Rama, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you, my friend, and very best to you and your family. Mark in Long Beach, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Well, I was thinking, if you just gave the pharmaceutical companies all the profits they expect by printing up an extra trillion like they like to do, problem solved. The medicines will be
No, finish your thought. I'm sorry. I've got to learn to control myself here. Usually, I only interrupt people when I'm down to 1 minute, right? But we've got 3 minutes. So finish your thought, Mark.
Yeah, it's a matter of, these if it's greed is the problem, you say, okay, you were going to make, Pfizer, you were going to make 500 million. Here it is. Release your patent and so forth. We've been printing up money to rescue us from this pandemic left and right. So print up an extra trillion, distribute it between the companies for them to let their patents go so we can solve the problem.
Yeah. The problem with giving product is that they just don't have the capacity to produce it, and that's why it needs to be made in all these literally thousands of generic drug-making facilities all around the world. The interesting thing, Mark, that I haven't seen anybody do the math on, and I was expecting when Lori Wallach came on our program, I believe it was Monday, to lay this whole thing out and explain what TRIPS was and all that kind of stuff. The thing that that occurred to me, and I don't have the data to do the math on this, but if Pfizer, for example, is going to get a 7% of sales royalty from every generic company that's making a version of their vaccine around the country, we're going to go from Pfizer producing maybe 1 billion vaccines or 500 million vaccines, probably 1 billion vaccines over the course of the next 24 months. We're going to go from them producing 1 billion to them producing 1 billion and the generic companies producing probably 5 or 10 billion, because it's going to take that. It's going to take 10 or 15 billion doses to vaccinate the world. 10 billion, and they're paying that 7% royalty to Pfizer. Pfizer may end up with more money than they could ever make if they just kept it all in their own factories. Even though they're making less per dose, there's going to be so many more doses. So, nobody seems to be considering that either. I mean, this may actually be a giant money-making opportunity for these companies. Not to pick on Pfizer. I'm using them as the example because I got their shot. I love their shot. I think, they did a great job with this product. But, point made. Mark, thank you for the call. And thanks for listening to KPFK. It's much appreciated. KPFK, that is in Fund Drive right now, so help them out. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, thoughts, arguments, debates in just a moment. And back. James in Los Angeles listening on KPFK. Hey, James, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Just fine. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, just a follow-up on your one previous caller who said something about the AstraZeneca vaccine, that they had not asked for the rights. Well, for the patent rights. What it was really is, I have the stories here. I looked it all up.
Thank you.
Actually, the Oxford University was the one who developed the vaccine. They had sold the rights to they had at the beginning in August of 2020 had said that they were going to waive the rights of the patent only during the pandemic. Right. And the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, moved in and coerced them, I guess, to protect the IP rights. He said
that's interesting.
They should go ahead. They should go ahead.
It was Bill Gates just a couple of days ago who said that that we need to protect these IP rights and there shouldn't be waivers. Exactly. Forgive the interruption. Right. Back to you, James. So
that's what he did. He had coerced them, the Oxford University, into selling the rights to AstraZeneca. So AstraZeneca, with all its murky deals, we don't know anything of what they did. They more than likely had put together a deal that says we are going to protect the IP rights. So it wasn't really AstraZeneca who asked for the rights. It was for to waive the patent rights. It was Oxford University, but they found out, like later on in the long term, they would make millions of dollars. They're still going to get, or billions of dollars, let's put it that way.
Oh, there's big money here.
It really is. So it wasn't really
James, thank you.
Who asked for it? Yes, sir.
Thank you. That comports with my memory. I remember vaguely as that was happening. That was some time ago. But yeah, thank you very much, James. Great to hear from you. I appreciate it. Alan in Newport Beach, also listening on KPFK in Pledge Drive. Help them out. Hey, Alan, what's up?
You had mentioned earlier the origin of the word fascism coming from the Roman bundle of sticks.
Yeah.
You might, as a young child, I recall that it was on the American currency. Now, if you look at the back of the Mercury dime,
you're right.
There.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember that. My dad used to collect coins, and yeah, the fasce. It's carved into various pieces of wood all over the House and Senate. I mean, because it was. The framers of the Constitution, the founders of this country, they were looking at the Greek democracy and the Roman Republic. Those were their two role models, to see, how do you do this? And the Roman Republic used the fasce, the bundle of sticks, as their logo. And early on in our republic, and right up until the 1930s, as you point out, I think the Mercury dime first came out in the 1920s? Am I remembering right? Do you know, Alan?
No, I don't. All I do is recall when as a kid, seeing the Mercury dime and say, oh, yeah. Okay, very good. Thank
it
you.
was way back in the day. Yeah, and so, it was like, yes, it was, homage to that. Alan, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment, so stick around. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I know a couple of people have contacted me that, my rant about how do we stop corporations from shoving fascism down our throats was mailed out this morning to our list over at HartmannReport.com. And right now the website isn't coming up. That website exists on the Substack servers, and Substack, according to their Twitter feed right now, is having a problem. So, just give it a little bit of time and then try Hartmann Report, a little later on, and it should be fine. You shouldn't have a problem. So anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Ben in Houston, Texas. Hey, Ben, what's up?
Two things. Back 2001, anthrax scare, the Bush administration threatened to do exactly what the Biden administration is doing right now, and give out the I forgot what the
it was Cipro.
Cipro, yes. So they threatened to do that, and sure enough, because whoever had Bear said, "Oh yeah, all those we can get you in about 18 months," and it's like, So anyway, they used it back then. But the reason I was calling was there's another view of why America wants to do that, or Biden administration wants to do that, give out the vaccine, is because Russia and China are already doing it. Russia sold vaccine to Peru, and then shortly thereafter Peru agreed to give them access to a lithium mine, and then China they gave vaccine to Algeria, and guess what? Now Algeria is promising not to make any comment about anything internal in China. So our near peers are already doing this. So just maybe one
That's
other
a
thing.
really important point, Ben. I mean, what you just made is a really important point, that China and Russia, who both have developed vaccines that are not anywhere near as effective, apparently, as most of the ones developed, in the United Kingdom and the United States. They're using those vaccines as instruments of statecraft, as instruments of foreign policy. And if we can get some of these companies to waive their patent protections, not in their entirety, they'll still make money. But if we can pull this thing off, we can play that game too. Ben, that's brilliant. And I know I interrupted you just before you finished your thought. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, actually, and the thing is, this has been going on a long time. In the early 2000s, China went into Africa and said, "Hey, look, we'll build you schools and roads and stuff," and then guess what? They got oil contracts. So You're right. Typically, there's soft power, that's what this is, and then there's hard power, which a lot of times the U.S. implements, and they go in and force their way. But anyway, just to contribute to your conversation, I love your show.
Thank you, Ben. Very, very well said. And I would add that hard power aspect, the military threat, that was what the Trump administration entirely focused on. And they pulled back most of our soft power stuff, USAID and all these other programs where we go around the world and we vaccinate people, we deal with the AIDS crisis in Africa. We're doing, this, just a whole variety of these things. Yeah, well said, Ben. Thank you. Greg in Germantown, Maryland. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Well, I was going to talk about the cost of drugs. The government has very much power in setting prices on that. First off, it's been done in the utility industry, even with the open market utilities. In many states, they still guarantee them 24% profits. I mean, massive profits. And that's what the commissions do. They just set the price. They set it very high. And they have no trouble doing this in drugs if they want. It's done. And every state controls the cost of insurance, the cost that hospitals can pay or charge. There's massive amounts of regulation on the pricing in medicine. There's no reason at all why they can't simply say a reasonable profit is 12%, even though the average profit for corporations is 6%. So if they put it at 12%, nobody could complain.
Yeah, and I think that some of these vaccine companies are making 300%, 500%, 10,000%, God only knows what.
Absolutely.
But,
Absolutely.
They're recovering their initial investments very, very quickly. But your point is well taken, and I would add to it that the other way that governments can control prices is by mass purchases. If we were to do away with that 2005 law that George W. Bush and the Republicans put into place that said that it's illegal for Medicare to negotiate drug prices, Medicare that literally buys millions of pills every single day in the United States and has to pay full retail one pill per price. If Medicare was able to go out and say, okay, this year we're gonna buy 10 million doses of amoxicillin. But we don't want to pay that $1 a pill retail price. We want to pay the penny a pill retail, wholesale price that you charge the Army, or that you charge the hospitals, or that you charge, one of the HMOs. Then we would have some control over the pricing that way too. So excellent point, Greg. Excellent point. Thank you very much. Stick around. We will be back. Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. We're going to be talking about the gig economy. It's going to get interesting. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
What if we took monopoly?
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, also now available as an ebook, and his Twitter handle, Prof. Wolff, P-R-O-F, as in Professor, Wolff, W-O-L-F-F. One of his websites is also rdwolf with 2fs.com if you want to check that out. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. I want to ask this, but I don't want it to sound just like, facile, but is the gig up on the gig economy? I mean, are we seeing now the strengthening or the weakening of the gig economy? And maybe we should start out by defining it and how it fits into the realm of capitalism or regulated capitalism. As a consequence, in part of, for example, the pandemic, we're seeing all these gig economy workers who are getting screwed because they were, quote, independent contractors on the one hand. On the other hand, you're seeing efforts to give gig economy workers rights, which failed in California, but I believe succeeded in the United Kingdom. Correct me if I'm wrong, someplace in Europe. What's the deal here? Is the gig up on the gig economy?
Well, I think the answer is an unsatisfying yes and no. Let's start with what the gig economy is. Basically, it means an economy in which the relationship between the employer and the employee kind of changes from the typical one where you go to work for an employer, you sign a contract if you have a job with a union, sometimes even without a union, and then you're subject to a whole lot of laws and regulations that were built up over centuries as workers tried to get a better deal. For example, that there's an 8-hour day rather than a 12 or 16-hour day, that you have a certain number of bathroom breaks, that you get a few days off a year, that you get insurance, the variety of things that we nowadays call wage protection and benefit programs. So that was the typical thing. Employers always fought against every one of those, didn't want to pay for them, didn't want to be constrained by them. Workers had to go to all kinds of lengths, boycotts, strikes, job actions to get them. It's a long history. One of the ways, and here's the crucial part, one of the ways employers always dealt with this, if they lost the fight and the law was passed that they had to give an 8-hour day or give bathroom breaks or whatever, was they would accept it and then look for escapes. After the law was a reality, how do we evade the law, having delayed it for decades? And here comes the gig economy. By reclassifying a worker, that you're not an employee as you have been perhaps for decades, you are now a contractor. You are simply a person I enter into a deal with like I would with another business, and you are therefore just running your own gig. It's as if your labor became the product you produced rather than the capability you sold to me as an employee. And why would they want to reclassify you? Because if you weren't an employed worker on the payroll, well, then all the protections in the law for a payroll worker wouldn't apply. So a gig worker could be doing exactly the same thing he or she did before as an employee, but because they were reclassified as a gig worker, they didn't have to get 8-hour day. They didn't have to get bathroom breaks. They didn't have to do any of that. They didn't have to pay for workman's compensation. All of the other aspects of constraint won by the working class over decades and centuries could be evaded, and that's why it happened. It has nothing to do with the so-called sharing economy or with technological breakthroughs. It was an effort to re-establish the world as it was in the fantasy of employers before workers won all the protections that they have become accustomed to.
It's kind of pre-1880, more or less, or right. Even before that.
Right. It's going backwards, and that's all it was. It was attractive to employers because it boosted their bottom line. They saved on all the costs of worker protection. That's why they did it. The rest of it was all window dressing, sharing, all that kind of, if you pardon me, a BS was designed to hide or to give opportunities to marginalized workers. All of this extra stuff was dragged in. It worked, by the way, in California with that voter action last year, which is sad, which fell for that kind of stuff. But I think in most of the world it is being discovered, certainly in European countries, but elsewhere too. It is what it is, and you're going to have to fight it one way or another if you're going to hold on to the protections that workers have come to. And as gig workers experience the way Uber and Lyft drivers have, the constriction of their income that they are now vulnerable to, they will become the very leaders of efforts to get for themselves what the workers' protections always were. And you can see the pressure on Biden to pass. Marty Walsh, the former mayor of Boston, issued that rule over the last couple of days. That's partly a response to the pressure that's now coming from these gig workers who are understanding what this ripoff always was.
You know, as a small business owner and an employer, I'm just astonished by this. I mean, one of the most expensive and difficult things for any company is turnover. You know, replacing an employee, having to retrain them and everything. And you know, we provide full health benefits. We provide, I think, reasonable pay. Our part-time workers, of course, are not getting the full-time, or, you know, not getting health benefits. But but you know, it's I'm happy to comply with the labor laws and, you know, make sure that people are treated well, because I want them to stay with me. I mean, you know, this seems like stupid, frankly, in a way. I suppose if there's a large enough market of if you're talking low-skilled people, all they need to know how to do is drive a car, and you've got lots and lots of desperate people, you can exploit a lot of them for a long time. But isn't there a limit? Isn't there a point where this just kind of blows up and becomes something that isn't of advantage to companies?
It is, but Tom, here's how this works. You can suck a lot of people into these kinds of scams for a while. And I don't just mean the desperate worker who wants a little extra money with whatever car he can get his hands on, although that's part of the story. It's also the investors. Basically, these companies go to investors and say, hey, we've got a sure-proof profit deal. It won't last forever, but for the next few years, we're going to be able to offer people what is in effect a taxi ride without having to cover all the talks that a legitimate taxi company has had to cover, all of those laws protecting the taxi driver. We're going to get around them. We're going to be able to charge pretty much what the taxi fare would have cost, but without all the costs that a regular taxi company has. We're going to make a bundle. You can get in on it by buying a share or getting involved as a venture capitalist early on, and it'll be a very profitable business until history catches up with us, and we have to do for our drivers what taxi companies have had to learn to do with theirs. So it's a quick turnover kind of hustle.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Well, thank you for the overview, the explanation, and the history. Professor Richard Wolff, his latest. Thank you very much. His latest book, The Sickness is the System, democracyatwork.info. Prof. Wolff over at Twitter, Professor Richard Wolff, one of the good guys. We'll be back with more of the news of the day, your calls, my thoughts, in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How do we stop corporations from shoving fascism down our throats? By the way, HartmannReport.com is back up now. And welcome back. Joe in Seattle. Hey, Joe, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hey, good morning. It's interesting we're talking about fascism in May. As in 3 days, it'll be the 76th anniversary of the defeat of fascism and Nazism by the Allies and Soviet Union.
Oh, interesting. VE Europe Day is this week or next week?
No, it's on Sunday.
Tomorrow.
Well, it's celebrated on the 9th in Europe, and it's celebrated on the 8th here in the United States. 76 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a big victory. But the reason why I'm calling today is to really answer your question: how do we defeat fascism in the United States? I think it's important that we look at history. How did we defeat fascism last time? And I think the way we did it was with a united front. You know, many people coming together for the same of defeating fascism and really understanding what fascism is. We can look at the Bulgarian communist Georgy Dimitrov defines fascism as the power of finance capital itself.
Yeah. That's interesting. So I think one of the lessons that has been lost, because the people who were alive at the time it happened are all largely dead. My father's generation, and that is that the way that we, at least for 2 generations, prevented a recurrence of fascism in both Japan and Germany, is when those countries after their defeat at our hands, us and the Soviets and others, but at the defeat after they were defeated, we didn't just colonize them, like Dick Cheney suggested we should do with Iraq, and suck their oil out. We instead helped them rebuild their own countries. We loaned them money. We gave them money. This was the Marshall Plan.
Yeah, you're talking about Marshall Plan, right?
Right, and they rebuilt their own industries, but perhaps more importantly, we also had lengthy conversations with their new political systems, who in the very beginning were, of course, beholden to us. I mean, they were politicians that we allowed to be put into place in Germany and Japan, and we said to those politicians, and this was largely Harry Truman. We said to those politicians, you should try something. Harry Truman basically said to the Germans, I'm trying in the United States to make unionization an absolute right nationwide, and I just had that voted down by Congress with the Smoot-Hawley Act, and I am trying in the United States to get a national single-payer healthcare system. I can't pull it off. Why don't you do it in Germany? It'll be good for Germany, and it'll give me an example that I can show Americans, so I can sell it to America. And so they did this in Germany, and they did this in Japan. And you could call these things socialism. I have no problem with that. I would call it democratic socialism, to be technical. But I think you could say that what has prevented the rise of fascism in Germany and Japan for now, 3-4 generations.
I don't think so.
Is socialism.
I'd like to respond to that if I can.
Very quickly.
But it sounds like we're coming up on a break.
Yeah, you got about 10 seconds if you want to do it very quick.
Fascism is still on the rise. It's because socialism was overthrown in those countries. And what we need to defeat fascism is build socialism once again.
I'm with you. Good one, Joe. Thank you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. And welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And is the gig economy done? Basically, is the gig economy over? Well, the other thing I wanted to get into is this whole issue. Well, actually, we're going to be talking with Ben Jealous in the next hour. About voter suppression and all those kind of things. But there are a couple of other issues that I thought were really worth bringing up. Things that basically we need to know about, but also I think we need to have a take on. On March 22nd of 2019, this was the third year of the Trump administration, Robert Mueller submitted his report listing 10 clear examples of Donald Trump personally engaging in obstruction of justice. Each one of those 10 things that Donald Trump could be put in prison for as president. And then in another part of the report, he listed how Donald Trump had
They weren't able to establish the smoking gun, in part because Trump and his family refused to testify and refused to turn over any documents. But all of the circumstantial evidence and all of the evidence they were able to gather from actual Russian agents and oligarchs associated with the Russians and Ukrainians and whatnot, that basically Donald Trump got elected in large part because Paul Manafort, who had worked for these oligarchs in that part of the world, was feeding polling data to them. They were using that polling data then to use Facebook to discourage mostly black voters from voting for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And so Mueller established that, it was the Russians who helped put Trump into office, and that Trump tried to cover that up and engaged in obstruction of justice at least 10 different times in ways that he could go to jail. And now we've got, Judge Amy Berman Jackson saying Bill Barr, when the Mueller report came out, it was supposed to go right to the public, unredacted. Mueller had already gone through and taken out anything that he believed was sensitive. So it was supposed to go right out, and instead the Attorney General stepped in, Bill Barr, and said, no, we're not going to do that. This is the same Bill Barr who back in 1992, when Lawrence Walsh, who was the special prosecutor at that time, who had been appointed by Congress, who had spent years investigating the Iran-Contra scandal, where Ronald Reagan, the Reagan campaign, most likely Bill Casey, reached out, who was Reagan's campaign manager in 1980, reached out to the Iranians who had seized as hostages some 30 or 40 members of our U.S. embassy, had reached out to them and said, hang on to those hostages. Jimmy Carter was president, and the Reagan campaign said, hang on, because Carter was quite popular, actually. He didn't lose his popularity until just the 2 months before the election. Up until that point, he was polling way ahead of Reagan. Reagan was considered a right-wing crackpot. And the Reagan campaign went to the Iranians and said, you guys hang on to the hostages. This will make Jimmy Carter look like a weakling. And in fact, Carter even, tried a rescue mission, sent helicopters across the desert, and one of the helicopters got caught in a sandstorm and went down, and that was the end of that rescue mission. And that got a lot of publicity. Of course, the Republicans pounding on that. Oh, Carter can't even, do a rescue. So Reagan's deal was, you hang on to the hostages, and we'll sell you all the spare parts you want for the military that we built for the Shah that you just took over. Keep in mind, this was just a year after they had thrown the Shah out. The Shah had, in fact, Jimmy Carter invited the Shah to the United States, where he died of cancer in one of our hospitals, or was being treated for it anyway. I'm not sure exactly where he died, but it was during that time period. The Shah died, the right-wingers took over, and the right-wing religious crazies. And then the payoff to Iran for holding on to these hostages was that we would sell them weapons, which we did. The Reagan administration did this for 5 or 6 years. Illegally sold weapons to Iran, and then took the money from that. Congress had passed a law saying that Reagan could not interfere in the governments of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, because they were putting into place democratic socialism. They were putting into place national health care systems, free college education for everybody, strong social security programs, and the Republicans thought that was socialism, that was the first step to communism, and so they were trying to disrupt those 3 countries. And so Congress actually passed a law saying that the Reagan administration could not interfere with those countries. So what they did was they took this secret money that they got from Iran for selling them illegal weapons and used that secret money to buy weapons here in the United States and smuggle them down to Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala. And that's why those 3 countries are all screwed up. So anyhow, in 1992, when Lawrence Walsh was closing in on the role of George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan in this god-awful deal, this crime, it was Attorney General Bill Barr who recommended that George H.W. Bush, then the president, who had just lost the election, pardon all these people and end the investigation.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Which is exactly what Bush did on Christmas Eve, 1992. Look at the New York Times. And that was the end of the investigation. Giant cover-up by Bill Barr.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. And this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Alan in Seattle. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Good morning. Well, it's a few thoughts on the patents and the pandemic. Should all the mistakes be made, i.e. the drug companies prevail and they keep their patents, and India says, no, we're not going to pay you, it's an Occam's razor, simply because if the virus isn't going to stop mutating, and so at some point in time in the future, the vaccines developed will be non-effective against the variants that are developing in India, and therefore their patents would be almost worthless.
Good point. Good point. I see this as, given how rapidly this virus mutates, there are some viruses that mutate very, very slowly and very rarely, like measles, for example. It's still, or polio has not mutated consequentially. And I'm not a virologist. I don't understand or know why, one virus is more likely to mutate than others. But we certainly have seen this with the flu virus. And every now and then, a mutation with the flu virus comes along that just is lethal. The Spanish flu of 1918 killed 500,000 Americans. I think it was 600,000 Americans. We probably have had more deaths from COVID. Obviously, the numbers have been undercounted, particularly in states like Florida that made it difficult to count the deaths. So we probably had, the same number of deaths. But that's with normal COVID, right? That's not with the new, the new variants that are even more deadly. And what happens when one comes along that instead of having a 1, 2, 3, 4% fatality rate, has a 40% mortality rate? Well, and the reason I raise that is not just some alarmist, crazy crap that I pulled off the top of my head. SARS, the SARS viruses, these coronaviruses, this particular type of viruses that are all called, I think SARS stands for what? Severe acute respiratory, whatever it is. Anyway, those SARS viruses, including the original SARS virus, the original SARS virus killed about half the people who got it. Remember? I mean, the one that started in Hong Kong and that we shut down within a few months. And now you've got MERS, M-E-R-S, which is the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And MERS is related to this coronavirus also. And MERS has a fatality rate between 30 and 40%. I mean, it's really seriously deadly stuff. So if this coronavirus, which is in that family, mutates and acquires that level of lethality, and that mutation also makes it immune to viruses, we're in deep crap, Alan. I mean, we're in deep trouble. And the thing that is increasing the probability of that kind of doomsday scenario, and I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think the odds are very much against it. But hey, we're talking literally hundreds of billions of viruses in one human body, in every person who's infected, and now we've got billions of people, right? So we're talking hundreds of trillions or trillions of trillions of viruses out there reproducing, very, very rapidly. Every few seconds, viruses are reproducing. So the probability of mutation, and this is one that mutates fairly easily, the probability of mutation is quite high. So we have an absolute international imperative to stop this virus, to stop this mutation process, and get it at least under control worldwide for a while, so we can take a breather and get ready for when it mutates. So when the flu of 1918 version or the MERS version of the COVID-19 coronavirus, SARS coronavirus, comes along, we'll be ready for it, or we'll be at least partly ready for it. And instead, what we've got is Fox News telling people not to get vaccinated. You got Donald Trump hiding the fact that he's vaccinated. You've got half the Republicans in the U.S. Congress refusing to say if they're vaccinated. You've got all these mask holes, running up to people. And you had this woman the other day in New York going after an elderly Asian couple with a hammer because they were wearing masks. I mean, this is the kind of insanity that's being promulgated by the right. They're doing it for the short-term political benefit because Trump and the Republicans think that if they can keep the virus circulating in the United States, they can prevent Biden from fully opening the economy. If they can prevent him from opening the economy, they can prevent him from an economic recovery. If they can prevent him from an economic recovery, then Republicans have a good chance in the 2022 and 2024 elections. That's their calculus. And they are literally risking billions of lives to do it. They were willing to let 500,000 people die earlier on. We saw this huge spike where hundreds of thousands of people died between September and in January during the election period, when Donald Trump was pushing so hard to reopen the economy so that the economic numbers would look good so that he would get reelected. He was willing to let a couple 100,000 people die for that. And we now know from the studies that it was at least 400,000 unnecessary American deaths because Trump pushed to open the economy, and all the Republicans did with him. But now we're talking not just 400,000 people. We're talking, 400 million people, maybe 4 billion people. We're talking a disease that could, really scrub the earth of human beings. And a lot of other animals as well, by the way. This thing, affects other mammals as well. So I think that you have just put your finger on the very, very tip of a very, very large problem. And well said. Alan, thank you a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to KBCS there in Seattle. Joe in La Grande, Oregon. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I had a question about your prices set by the government for Medicare. And so if we have the government set the prices, and I'm kind of comparing apples and oranges here, but Modi also set prices for the farmers, and he way underpaid them for the cost of their production. And I understand that drug companies have hyperinflation, inflated costs and things. But at some point, could it not come back to bite us if we're letting the government set prices on things?
Of course. Of course. And by the way, Modi setting those prices for farmers just wiped out a lot of small farmers.
He's not a good man.
Yeah, and therefore you had farmers committing suicide and farmers protesting, and then Modi brought in the army and started killing farmers, and et cetera, et cetera.
That's the apples and oranges. So I think because it's a corporation versus individuals, so I'm sure that's the apple oranges part of that.
But this TRIPS thing, and this was why if you didn't have an opportunity, Joe, and I know not everybody watches the entire show or listens to the entire 3 hours, but if you have an opportunity to check out our YouTube channel and listen to which is youtube.com/Thom Hartmann, and listen to or watch the conversation I had with Lori Wallach, who's the executive director of Global Trade Watch, the arm of Public Citizen that looks at international trade. Her point was that this TRIPS deal, this waiver in the patents, is not going to hurt the pharmaceutical company. It's not going to hurt their ability to set prices in the countries where they are doing it, where they're selling their products like the United States and Europe. It is going to make more money for them, actually. Go ahead.
Could it drift into other companies or different industries as kind of where I'm coming from it? So I'm sure.
I don't think this is a slippery slope situation, Joe. I think everybody recognizes that if the time comes that the pharmaceutical companies say, screw it, we can't make any money, we're going to go make cars instead, that we're all in trouble. And I think we're a good long distance away from that. Although I realize that argument is actually being made on right-wing radio right now. I heard a commentator yesterday, making that comment, that Biden just wants to destroy the pharmaceutical companies, and pretty soon they're just all going to move to Europe and say, to hell with you, America. No, that's not what Biden's...
They also made the same comment that they were that if they allowed gay marriage, that we were going to marry animals too. So they obviously are off somewhere.
Exactly. It's hyperbole. It's hyperbole that is based on a grain of logic, but not really a grain of truth. And the logic assumes, a straw man argument that extends to some sort of bizarre extreme that nobody is literally even talking about. And although the media, not understanding this, keeps talking about blowing up the patents, giving away the patents, undoing the patents, nobody's talking about that. We're talking about licensing these patents to other companies for a fee. And a reasonable fee, a profitable fee.
Well,
it's just not quite as much money as you can make.
I don't think anyone should profit from a vaccine anyway.
Yeah, well, that's a debate we can have, and I don't entirely disagree with you, Joe. But that's a whole separate topic.
You're
I think.
listening
Thank you.
to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I think Joe isn't on the line anymore. I'm assuming that's because there's such life-saving things, but there are other life-saving things too. I think we have to achieve a balance. And welcome back. Hey, Dennis in Riverside, California. Dennis, thanks for calling. I'm assuming 90.7 FM is KPFK?
KPFK, that's right. We only get 1 hour with you, so I'm listening on my phone all this time.
Oh, jeez, I'm sorry. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for waiting.
Yeah. Hey, listen, simple point. Attack Donald Trump on his businessman reputation. He's a big fraud. Read David K. Johnson, read all this stuff about him, how he stiffed everybody, how he kept a stable of lawyers like a mafioso kept a stable of goons and hitmen. That's the way to attack him. Otherwise... Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay.
Otherwise?
Biden should have won by a lot more. And they never mentioned that. They never tried to call him a fraud. Instead, it's all about voting for good old Joe and vote for Kamala Harris. She'll break a glass ceiling. And it was all kind of lame, really. If you think back to 2016.
I agree with you, Dennis, and I think that the media just has always fallen. I mean, literally going back to the 70s, the media has always fallen for the lies that Donald Trump has told them about what a great success he was back when he was, he had a couple $100 million worth of real estate that he had inherited from his daddy, and he lied to Forbes and said it was worth $1 billion, and they published that lie. And then as he started building in New York City and was dealing with the mafia and or mafia-controlled companies and whatnot, and lying to his banks, and I think that's now going to come back to haunt him, and lying to his insurance companies and lying to the tax people in New York State and in New York City, and hopefully he, all those things are going to come back on the Trump organization. My prediction is that within 5 years, the entire Trump organization is going to be in bankruptcy. And, every member of the family will have skimmed their $300, $400, $500 million off the top and stashed it away in some foreign account, and will never have to work again, and we'll never have to worry again. But, that this organization has always been like a giant Ponzi scheme. It's always been, a giant scam. It's always been based on tax fraud, ripping people off, lying to people like Trump University and so many of the condos and things. The Ivanka got busted for making a sales pitch for condos. Oh yeah, we're at 90% or whatever, a real high percentage, and it turned out it was some very, very low percentage of sales. Now you've got Scotland looking into what, Trump's lies. He actually received money from the government of Scotland for Turnberry, and apparently used it to lay off employees. It was supposed to be used to keep your employees on your payroll. I mean, the guy is not just a hustler. He's a con man. Unless you can think of a better word, Dennis.
Yeah. Well, the trouble is that the 74 million people who voted for him buy it, and have to figure out a way to get them to unbuy it. And it might be crude, I don't know. But talking about all the other things that are fascinating and all that, it's to a Trump voter, it looks like an end run around his success with the economy before COVID. So think back to 2016. It was the third Bush versus the second Clinton. Big snore. Okay, I'm out. All right.
Yeah, Dennis, thank you. Good points all. I appreciate it. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Got to read a commercial here on the commercial side of the program, and I will be back in 1 minute. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? The last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Mark in San Francisco. Mark, what's on your mind?
Well, what's on my mind is these corporations have come out there for democracy. Well, shouldn't the Democrats come out and say they should be supporting Democratic candidates because we're the party that believes in democracy? And Liz Cheney just confirmed the Republican Party no longer does.
Yeah, she really did. And this battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party is going to be fascinating. Our conversation yesterday about what Mitch McConnell is up to has me thinking and wondering and increasingly thinking that maybe this is his will survive Trump strategy. But I don't know. I'm not real sure. But I think you're right. And if corporations want to claim that they support democracy, they need to just stop funding Republican candidates. Because these guys are not fans of small d democracy in a small r republic at all. Mark, well said. Thank you. Alex in Oak Forest, Illinois. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I was just wanted to make a comment about the segment with Charles Sower at the beginning of your show. You have these economists, and they're talking about free markets and how the investors should get their profits, their profits. They forget to mention that, the U.S. taxpayer is the investor. So why aren't we getting some sort of, benefit from that? If we're taking the risk and funding all these vaccines and this research, which, Noam Chomsky detailed decades ago, that's how it's happening, in our major universities. Why aren't we, the investors, getting the return?
It's a good question. And, the pharmaceutical companies would say, well, you are getting the return. You're getting the benefit of a product that saves your lives. But in terms of the financing, what I find amazing is that PhRMA, the pharmaceutical trade organization, Wendell Potter talks about this a lot, and he talks about it a lot in his most recent book. And I don't have the title off the top of my head, but you can, if you go over to Amazon or any of the other book sites, Powell's, and just type in Wendell Potter, it'll pop right up. And he's got a website too, tarbell.org, Tarbell. But what he writes about a lot is how so many of these real drugs, the innovative drugs, are developed in our universities and paid for by grants from the National Institutes of Health. And most of the money that the pharmaceutical industry uses to, quote, develop new drugs is not to develop really genuinely new drugs. It's to take, an individual drug, one of the antidepressants or something, and tweak the molecule just a little bit, hang a new hydroxyl group on it, or put a hydrogen atom, move it from here to here, so that it still works the same way in the body, it still produces the same effect, but now it's technically a brand new drug. And so the patent, which is about to expire, can be renewed, so you can continue charging absurd prices for it. Or you can give it a whole brand new name and have a whole brand new patented product. And we've seen this particularly with the SSRI drugs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, the Prozac, family of drugs. But it's happening right across the board. And I'm with you.
Congressional Budget Office in 2006 released a report called the Research and Development in the Pharmaceutical Industry. At the beginning of Chapter 4, they say, and I quote, out of 21 of the most influential drugs introduced between 1965 and 1992, only 5 were essentially developed entirely by the private sector. We see this time and time again. And it's not just pharmaceuticals. Chomsky described that, the first computer chips were purchased by the government. And, MIT and all those schools were doing the research, and these private corporations take over that research, market it, and turn it into a product. But overwhelmingly, it's being funded by us, the taxpayers. And I just think it's funny that, people like Charles Sauer want to say, well, the investors took the risk. Well, let's talk about that, because we are the investors. So, again, why all the profits are going there, and why we don't own that property, why we're just giving, all this technology to private companies like, the iPhone, Siri, GPS, all that stuff is developed by the military. But Apple is reaping the profits from it. So that was my only comment. I just think it's a little ironic.
And the internet. Through which, you're watching me on YouTube, Alex, and and I'm delivering my program to all our various radio and TV stations via the internet. And the internet was developed, with our tax dollars, DARPANet, and spot on. And I think it's just remarkable that the pharmaceutical industry then comes out and says, or you see these companies, typically it's pharma ads. But occasionally even the companies will talk about, we invested millions of dollars in research and development. And no, they're actually spending more money on advertising than they are on R&D. Exactly. And the R&D that they are doing really isn't designed to develop new drugs. It's designed to get around the patent laws or the expiration of the patent laws. Go ahead.
It's funny that the contradiction that the free market doesn't really exist once you start introducing subsidies, and for some reason that point never gets discussed when we talk with economists and such. So anyway, I don't want to take up more of your time. I appreciate it, and I love your show. So thank you very much.
Oh, Thank you, Alex. It's good to hear from you. I appreciate the call, and your timing is perfect because it's the end of the hour. So we will be back on the other side of this break in just a moment. I want to get into Republican voter suppression. Ben Jealous will be with us at 20 minutes after the hour, and how Republican voter suppression has metastasized, and also this moratorium on evictions. I'm going to start with that right after this break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading about Thunderdome politics, an uncivil war taking back our democracy in an age of Trumpian disinformation and Thunderdome politics by Greg Sargent, the Washington Post columnist. This is from his chapter on voter suppression. It's page 37. Republicans and Democrats inhabit different political realities, as mentioned in a previous chapter. But there are certain facts about our politics that are just objectively true. One of them is this. Generally speaking, efforts to make it harder to vote are almost always pushed by Republicans. You cannot understand what is happening in American politics right now without recognizing this stark and very fundamental difference between the two major political parties. During this decade, procedural hurdles were put into place in around 20 states that in some manner or other have made it harder to vote or to register to vote, or have undone previous efforts to make voting or registering easier, or have otherwise threatened serious disenfranchisement. Most of them were the creation of Republican lawmakers and officials. The difference in the two parties' national platforms for 2016 tells the story. The GOP platform champions additional hurdles that are absurdly disproportionate to the phantom abuse it alleges, while the Democratic platform champions multiple specific ways to make it easier to vote, not harder. The most common and controversial of methods used by Republicans to suppress Democratic turnout is the requirement that would-be voters present identification at the polls. The game here tends to turn on requiring forms of ID that some groups are less likely to have, making participation harder for them. Other restrictions include techniques like cutting back on early voting and making it harder to register, both of which have, in recent years, been instituted in multiple states. Republicans who have passed laws making it harder to vote have tended to claim such measures are necessary to protect against, quote, voter fraud. We'll look at this in more detail below, but for now, note that most of the states that have passed such measures did so while under Republican control. As New York University political scientist Samuel Isikoff has memorably put it, the single predictor necessary to determine whether a state will impose voter access restrictions is whether Republicans control the ballot access process. Scholars trace the modern era of warfare over election rules to the intensely contested presidential election of 2000, in which a divided Supreme Court halted the recount in Florida, throwing the presidency to George W. Bush. The closeness and partisan acrimony of that contest, combined with the intense national focus on election rules that accompanied the court battle over it, helped persuade both parties to invest much more attention and energy on those rules. As a result, both the implementation of measures restricting the ballot and the legal battles over them have intensified in recent years. A brief glance at the surprising history of voter ID laws begins to tell the story of this tightening. In the 1970s, several states implemented voter ID measures, but all of them provided for ways that voters without the proper ID could cast a ballot. By 2000, there were 14 such laws, and they had been implemented by politicians in both parties. But by the mid-2000s, amid rising post-2000 acrimony, a handful of red states began implementing voter ID laws that the nonpartisan National Conference of State Legislatures described as, quote, strict, meaning that they make it easy to disqualify those who don't pass muster. After one of those laws in Indiana was challenged and then upheld in 2008 by the Supreme Court, an escalation began that gained momentum in the Obama era. From 2010 onward, the adoption of voter ID laws in general, and of strict ones in particular, accelerated. Though a handful were blocked in the courts, as of this writing, a total of 34 states have voter ID laws in effect, 24 that are deemed non-strict and 10 that are deemed strict. The strict ones are in red states or in swing states where they were implemented by Republicans. The story is very similar if you evaluate the state's voting rules in a broader way, by including not just voter ID measures, but also cutbacks to early voting and restrictions on registration. Here the trend is just as pronounced. After the 2010 elections, the Brennan Center for Justice documented a sharp rise in efforts to pass such measures in the state legislatures across the country. Not all these efforts bore fruit, but many did. By the time voting took place in Election Day 2016, some 14 states had these new restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. Now, as of this writing, by the Brennan Center's count, some 20 states have successfully implemented either strict voting ID requirements or cutbacks to early voting or restrictions on registration or other measures with meaningful disenfranchising effects. If you're a liberal who's frustrated by the seemingly unbreakable Republican dominance of national politics, not to mention GOP control of most state governments across the country, then the chances are that these restrictions figure heavily into your explanation of this GOP supremacy. Indeed, social media has been absolutely saturated in recent years with variations of the lament that Republican political dominance is largely maintained through a combination of nefarious and undemocratic tactics, such as ballot restrictions that keep constituencies unfriendly to the GOP from voting, and extreme gerrymanders that have, in effect, built a fortress around the GOP's majority in the House of Representatives. Democrats frequently invoke the GOP's use of these tactics, often justifiably, to raise money and to galvanize turnout. This narrative contains some important truths. Some of the forms that these restrictions on voting access have taken in recent years are diabolically obvious in their efforts to keep constituencies supportive of Democrats from voting. Still others boast the distinction of being more insidiously designed and thus less obvious in their intentions. The book is An Uncivil War by Greg Sargent of The Washington Post.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, the third hour of our program. I want to get into this whole, what this Trump judge just did and how it has the capacity to destroy a lot of lives. I'm very concerned about this. Jennifer Epps Addison is on the line with us. Jennifer is the president and co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. That website is populardemocracy.org. The Twitter handle is CPD, as in Center for Popular Democracy, CPD Action. And then Jennifer's personal Twitter handle is Jepps, Jepps Addison, Addison. Jennifer Epps Addison. Jennifer, welcome to the program. Give us a snapshot of exactly what this judge did first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. I think it's important for folks to understand that right now, over 10 million people, nearly 1 in 7 renters in this country, is behind on their rent and is at risk of losing their shelter amid a pandemic. At the beginning of this pandemic, we were all told we need the shelter in place to protect ourselves and our communities. And there are millions of people across this country who are being now told, actually, even though the pandemic is continuing to ravage our communities, actually, we don't think your shelter is important. So, you know, the moratorium, the eviction moratorium, really was just a temporary measure of protection. It was set to expire. We have been continuing to fight to pass the Cancel Rent Act to make sure that we're not just providing a temporary solution, but we're actually fundamentally making sure that nobody is going to become homeless because of this pandemic. But this is a major blow to families across the country. And yesterday's decision to vacate that federal eviction moratorium, to say that it is not a public health issue to keep people housed and in their homes, has the possibility of causing irreparable harm to millions of families across the country. And so we are fighting back because we know that right now there is almost nothing, maybe besides access to vaccines, right? There is almost nothing more important to easing the burden of this pandemic than keeping families in their homes.
So the shtick that I'm seeing on right-wing websites and hearing on right-wing radio right now is it goes something like this. You know, a lot of middle-class folks, one of the ways that they have built some wealth is when they buy a new house, they keep the old one and they rent it out to somebody, and it becomes a source of income, and over time it appreciates, and it's a way of getting, you know, wealth for your retirement and your old age that a lot of middle-class families have done. And there are literally millions of people who have done this across the United States. And now these middle-class average folks who have a second home that they're renting out to somebody are not getting paid, but they still have to pay the property taxes, and they still have to pay the insurance, and they still have to pay the upkeep. And they're going bankrupt now too, and they're risking losing their own homes. Now, my understanding is that that's a relatively disingenuous argument because Congress has appropriated, I think it was $18 billion to pay these small landlords so that people can stay in their homes. But what is the response to that message that, as we speak, I guarantee you is being echoed almost word for what I just shared with you, or certainly concept for concept, on probably 1,000 radio stations right at this moment across the country?
Yeah. I mean, first thing to understand is that there are tens of millions of people struggling across this country because of this pandemic, and truthfully, long before this pandemic, because of unreasonable and skyrocketing housing, right? And so our message is that we want to truly help all of those folks who are, single property owners, who are landlords, who want to do the right thing, whose goal it is to keep their tenants in their house so that nobody goes, homeless in this pandemic. And one of the ways that we can do that, if Republicans were serious, right, about helping out these homeowners, what they would do is they'd immediately join the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act as co-sponsors, because that would ensure payment. It would cancel all of those payments for folks who are struggling, but it would ensure payment to folks in primary residence mortgage payments, as well as for folks who need to make their rent payments. And so we have the solutions here to make sure that we can protect folks. But what those Republicans are really concerned about are not those landlords that they keep touting out, but it's the big multinational corporations that are buying up the housing stock, the corporate landlords that own, thousands of units, that continue to raise rents even amid the pandemic. And what we saw after the Great Recession in President Obama's first term is that what happened is Congress used its power and the administration used its power to make banks and corporate landlords and those who had profited at exorbitant amounts in real estate whole. But we never saw that same level of attention paid to renters who lost so much and to homeowners, particularly Black and brown homeowners who, ended up after the Great Recession in cases of negative net wealth because of the obliteration of that housing stock. So we want to prevent that, right? And what we need is the Biden administration to act boldly and unapologetically through his legislation and through, in particular, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan and the American Rescues Plan that he recently passed, right? He can set the tone for governing in a way that says we have a commitment in this country to make sure that nobody goes unnecessarily unhoused. And we have an opportunity in this moment to use the federal policies and to use the incentivization of the federal government to keep people in their homes now, but to make sure that we transform the housing market. Because I think it's important for people to understand that we were in the middle of a homelessness crisis and a rent affordability crisis long before the pandemic began.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's here.
Forgive the interruption, but we're done. We have 2 minutes until we're going to hit a hard break here, and it's just going to shut us off. And that's a huge topic that I'd love to have you back on and talk about and do a deep dive into. But right now, dealing with this judge's decision, which short-circuited by 2 months the ability of people to stay in their homes. Number one, I understand he's a Trump-appointed judge. Is his decision outside the mainstream? Is this right-wing crankism that we're seeing, and is there a chance it'll be overturned? And number two, that piece of legislation you named that would make landlords whole as well as renters, has that passed the House and it's waiting for action in the Senate? Is that what's going on, or has it not even been passed through the House?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I want to say the Department of Justice has filed an appeal to this erroneous decision, and we are hopeful that the Biden administration will direct its DOJ to fight like hell to protect renters and all of our communities here. But the solution is for Congress to act, and as of right now, the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act has not passed the House, and so certainly Speaker Pelosi has named the housing crisis as a key priority to address. And there are components, right, of relief for housing relief and rent relief, both in the rescue plan that was passed as well as in the upcoming jobs and families plans. And so we need Congress to act desperately. The other thing, though, is join a community organization. Our affiliates in places like, ACE in California, New York Communities for Change and Make the Road New York, Black Leaders Organizing Communities, the New Georgia Project, right? These grassroots organizations are on the front lines of eviction defense and of protection. And so they're working in their local communities to pass eviction moratoriums locally, and you can get involved in that fight with them.
That's great. And populardemocracy.org is the place to go for the central information?
Absolutely.
Great. Jennifer Epps Addison, President and Co-Executive Director of the Center for Popular Democracy, populardemocracy.org. Jennifer, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you for having us.
It is great talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Steve in New York City. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today? Steve? I have no Steve there. On line 8, you might want to check it out, Joyce, because Steve is the only the only caller I have that's not on a commercial station. Everybody else is listening to Sirius XM or whatever, and they're in breaks. So let me just dig into this. Jessica Corbett wrote this piece for Alternate, delivering another blow to people across the United States still struggling. A Trump-appointed federal judge on Wednesday vacated the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's temporary federal eviction moratorium. I think it's important for us to all realize that this was a moratorium that was put into place by the Trump administration, or at least by the Centers for Disease Control, when it was under the control of the Trump administration. It wasn't some, radical socialist thing that came out of, Bernie Sanders' brain. Although, I'm sure he endorsed it. But my point is that we were saying we've got a public health crisis. We need people to stay, just literally shelter in place. Please don't go outside. Please don't get with a crowd. And so we're going to start protecting housing. And, that's what we were doing. That was the whole plan. And, whether we're getting there or not, that's a whole other question. Bob in Chula Vista, San Diego, California. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hi there, Tom. Out here in San Diego, I have a friend who's an octogenarian. She went to UC Berkeley and paid almost nothing in tuition, pocket change. And I'm wondering, I went to Berkeley as well in the late 80s, and I did have a little bit of student debt, but it was manageable. But I'm wondering, why can't we promote investing in human capital? Because we know that every dollar spent in public education comes back 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times to the government in taxes. Yeah. And all we need to do is make it need-based. So we're not just giving away money. We're saying we're investing in the future, just like we're investing in infrastructure. So
absolutely right. And the GI Bill, by the way, we now have measured this, right? We've had enough years to look back on what was the investment in the GI Bill, how much money was paid out, and like my dad went to college on the GI Bill. He didn't graduate because his mom got pregnant with me and he had to drop out and go to work in a steel mill. But Louise's dad, my wife's dad, he got his law degree on the GI Bill and became the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan. And what we know now is that the money that was invested in people like my dad and Louise's dad, the people who went to college on the GI Bill, that 100% of that money, which not only included tuition, but in some cases included housing and subsidies, in books and even a monthly, small monthly subsidy, that money came back to the United States sevenfold, 700% return on investment in increased tax revenues. In other words, the amount of money, not so much my dad, but certainly Louise's dad, who got his law degree, he made so much more money that he paid so much more in taxes that had he not had that college education, it wouldn't have made that money for the country. And so we got a 700% return in additional taxes on the cost of the GI Bill. How can we not look at that and say it's crazy not to have free college education and trade schools? Bob, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. On the line with us, if it didn't come through, on the line with us is Ben Jealous, the president of People for the American Way and the People for the American Way Foundation. He's a visiting scholar at the Annenberg School at Penn, former president of the NAACP, former candidate for governor of Maryland. with our old buddy Susie Turnbull as his running mate. PFAW is the website, and at Ben Jealous, spelled just like it sounds, is his Twitter handle. The People for the American Way is at People4. Ben, welcome back to the program. Let's, if we could just very briefly talk about how this morning on Fox News and just down the road from Mar-a-Lago, I think he was hoping that Trump was going to show up. Ron DeSantis, the governor or the emperor of Florida, signed a massive voter suppression bill. And this is metastasizing across the United States. This has, in my opinion, become an emergency. What do we do about this? How do we handle this fact that the Republican Party institutionally and on a state-by-state basis has become, as weirdly enough, Liz Cheney is calling them out, an what the founders would have called Republican Party, small r, a republic, what today we would call an anti-democratic party, small d, whichever word you want to use, you know, a party opposed to just the fundamental idea of representative government and the people, you know, a government that derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. What do we do?
This is only possible because the Jim Crow filibuster is still in place. We've got to get rid of the filibuster so we can pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, the For the People Act and the Voting Rights Restoration Act through the Senate. When you're in a situation where you have this type of crisis in a republic, in a representative democracy, the only cure is federal voting rights bills and getting them passed, frankly, on an emergency basis. The filibuster really was created in a mistake of governing in the early 19th century. It then became what the supporters of Jim Crow used to maintain segregation for as long as possible in the United States. It needs to go. There is nothing sacred about the filibuster. There's no reason why majority rule should not apply to the U.S. Senate as well. It is what governs our democracy in almost every other aspect of our democracy. There's no reason why we should need 60 votes in the Senate. We need to get rid of it, pass the For the People Act, that's H.R. 1, pass the Voting Rights Act, that's H.R. 4. It's the only thing that we can do to shut down what is now a massive voter suppression omnibus bill rolling through Florida, rolling through Texas, precisely because the Republican Party would rather remain to the far right of Attila the Hun rather than actually compete for more moderate voters, right, people of color, et cetera.
So, Ben, there are a couple of Democrats who are saying, you know, we kind of like the filibuster. My proposal was, okay, cool, we'll give you a filibuster. Let's do it like Jimmy Stewart. You can, as long as you've got 40 members on the floor and you're talking, you can hold up the Senate. But when you run out of things to say or you drop down to 39 members, it's all over and there's going to be a vote. Is there any discussion about kind of compromise stuff like that where you can still have something that's called the filibuster so that Joe Manchin can say, yes, we're still a great deliberative body? I just don't see a way out of this other than something like that. What's the conversation? We have about a minute and a half, by the way, before we're going to get hit with a hard break.
Yeah, no, look, you know, the doing it like Jimmy Stewart is certainly an option. And there are some advantages to that as far as the American people being able to see for themselves the BS that the racist rhetoric that the Republicans use. What we have to get rid of is this coward's filibuster, where a bill simply dies. You might recall, if 60% do not say that they'll support it in the U.S. Senate. You might recall that 400 bills died that way during the last recession. The American people as a whole would be a lot wealthier right now if many of those had passed. That is why, that is the legacy of this coward's filibuster that we have right now, this Jim Crow filibuster.
Right. So any suggestions on how to apply any kind of pressure to Manchin and Sinema? We have 30 seconds.
Yeah, we have to turn up the pressure on Biden and Schumer. The reality is that Manchin and
because they can dangle
really
carrots and sticks.
Yeah, they're only going to respond really to the President of the United States and the Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate and Kamala Harris in between as both the President of the Senate and the Vice President of the United States. And they need to hear from us clearly that there is absolutely no out of this. We've got to get this through.
Right. And the filibuster.
Yeah.
There you go. Ben Jealous, pfaw.org. Ben Jealous, at Ben Jealous on Twitter. Ben, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's always great talking with you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.
Have a great one.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls, your thoughts on all of the news of the day that we've been discussing. Boy, is there a pile of it right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or book club today, Today we're reading about Thunderdome politics, an uncivil war taking back our democracy in an age of Trumpian disinformation and Thunderdome politics by Greg Sargent, the Washington Post columnist. This is from his chapter on voter suppression. It's page 37. Republicans and Democrats inhabit different political realities, as mentioned in a previous chapter. But there are certain facts about our politics that are just objectively true. One of them is this. Generally speaking, efforts to make it harder to vote are almost always pushed by Republicans. You cannot understand what is happening in American politics right now without recognizing this stark and very fundamental difference between the two major political parties. During this decade, procedural hurdles were put into place in around 20 states that in some manner or other have made it harder to vote or to register to vote, or have undone previous efforts to make voting or registering easier, or have otherwise threatened serious disenfranchisement. Most of them were the creation of Republican lawmakers and officials. The difference in the two parties' national platforms for 2016 tells the story. The GOP platform champions additional hurdles that are absurdly disproportionate to the phantom abuse it alleges, while the Democratic platform champions multiple specific ways to make it easier to vote, not harder. The most common and controversial of methods used by Republicans to suppress Democratic turnout is the requirement that would-be voters present identification at the polls. The game here tends to turn on requiring forms of ID that some groups are less likely to have, making participation harder for them. Other restrictions include techniques like cutting back on early voting and making it harder to register, both of which have, in recent years, been instituted in multiple states. Republicans who have passed laws making it harder to vote have tended to claim such measures are necessary to protect against, quote, voter fraud. We'll look at this in more detail below, but for now, note that most of the states that have passed such measures did so while under Republican control. As New York University political scientist Samuel Isikoff has memorably put it, the single predictor necessary to determine whether a state will impose voter access restrictions is whether Republicans control the ballot access process. Scholars trace the modern era of warfare over election rules to the intensely contested presidential election of 2000, in which a divided Supreme Court halted the recount in Florida, throwing the presidency to George W. Bush. The closeness and partisan acrimony of that contest, combined with the intense national focus on election rules that accompanied the court battle over it, helped persuade both parties to invest much more attention and energy on those rules. As a result, both the implementation of measures restricting the ballot and the legal battles over them have intensified in recent years. A brief glance at the surprising history of voter ID laws begins to tell the story of this tightening. In the 1970s, several states implemented voter ID measures, but all of them provided for ways that voters without the proper ID could cast a ballot. By 2000, there were 14 such laws, and they had been implemented by politicians in both parties. But by the mid-2000s, amid rising post-2000 acrimony, a handful of red states began implementing voter ID laws that the nonpartisan National Conference of State Legislatures described as, quote, strict, meaning that they make it easy to disqualify those who don't pass muster. After one of those laws in Indiana was challenged and then upheld in 2008 by the Supreme Court, an escalation began that gained momentum in the Obama era. From 2010 onward, the adoption of voter ID laws in general, and of strict ones in particular, accelerated. Though a handful were blocked in the courts, as of this writing, a total of 34 states have voter ID laws in effect, 24 that are deemed non-strict and 10 that are deemed strict. The strict ones are in red states or in swing states where they were implemented by Republicans. The story is very similar if you evaluate the state's voting rules in a broader way, by including not just voter ID measures, but also cutbacks to early voting and restrictions on registration. Here the trend is just as pronounced. After the 2010 elections, the Brennan Center for Justice documented a sharp rise in efforts to pass such measures in the state legislatures across the country. Not all these efforts bore fruit, but many did. By the time voting took place in Election Day 2016, some 14 states had these new restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. Now, as of this writing, by the Brennan Center's count, some 20 states have successfully implemented either strict voting ID requirements or cutbacks to early voting or restrictions on registration or other measures with meaningful disenfranchising effects. If you're a liberal who's frustrated by the seemingly unbreakable Republican dominance of national politics, not to mention GOP control of most state governments across the country, then the chances are that these restrictions figure heavily into your explanation of this GOP supremacy. Indeed, social media has been absolutely saturated in recent years with variations of the lament that Republican political dominance is largely maintained through a combination of nefarious and undemocratic tactics, such as ballot restrictions that keep constituencies unfriendly to the GOP from voting, and extreme gerrymanders that have, in effect, built a fortress around the GOP's majority in the House of Representatives. Democrats frequently invoke the GOP's use of these tactics, often justifiably, to raise money and to galvanize turnout. This narrative contains some important truths. Some of the forms that these restrictions on voting access have taken in recent years are diabolically obvious in their efforts to keep constituencies supportive of Democrats from voting. Still others boast the distinction of being more insidiously designed and thus less obvious in their intentions. The book is An Uncivil War by Greg Sargent of the Washington Post.
Usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this is kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords and all that kind of thing, conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support.
And welcome back. So let's have a conversation about what's going on here. There's a lot on the table, a lot of things we've talked about. Ken in Elkton, Maryland. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, you've hit so many things. I was calling up, talking about the money situation. You had the one lady on there talking about, people not being
the gig economy.
Yeah, how they're going to get thrown out. It can have the Republicans are saying about houses, and they're using them, that too.
But the housing moratorium, right? Yeah. Okay, go for it.
The whole thing with the money, money has been chasing the money forever and ever. It's always been. When I was a kid, I'm 60 now. You could work at a gas station when I got out of high school at 18, buy an old Chevy car for a couple $100, rent an apartment for a couple bucks. The insurance on the car was a couple $100 for a year, and you could actually make it. Now, as things progressed and so on and so forth, I went to Brainiac in school. I went to the shop classes and stuff that they don't have no more, Came out of high school, and I was born in South Jersey, and used to work in all the refineries and this and that. Up to 18 years old, it's $8 an hour. We used to climb through some of the refineries, some of the most terrible things, clean up asbestos with just little paper mask. How I don't have cancer, I don't know. But back to the money now, flip these many years later from the late 70s till now, you just have to make so much money to chase the money, and these politicians know that. You know, they know exactly what they're doing, whether you're talking about the pharmacy. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And all these years,
and they have gutted, you know, wages and the right to unionize. So that old Chevy that you were buying way back in the day, you know, you can't buy that car working in a gas station anymore. I paid my first term of college tuition working at an Esso station, changing tires and pumping gas, and working part-time washing dishes at Bob's Big Boy. I mean, you could do that, and that was in 1967 or 68. You could do that then. But now, absolutely not. And that is the pure result of something called Reaganomics or trickle-down economics. 100%. This is the Republican Party's idea of how an economy should work. We have tried this experiment now for a full 40 years. Some of us are old enough to remember what America was like before the experiment began, and it has screwed us, Ken.
It most certainly has. My father, he was 18 years old, World War II, all the time. He was one of the guys who worked away.
Same here.
Drove the boats that dropped the door down, dropped the Marines off on the beach, you know.
Whoa.
You know what I'm talking about? And he made it through that, came out, had steel plates in his head, blah, blah, blah. The doctor said, "You'll never walk again, Eggy." My dad said, "I'll walk out of this hospital," you know, when he woke up in the Philippines, wherever he was at. And he did, and then he went to college, which was free. And then he wasn't a book guy, and his mom pregnant, one of them deals. So he went to work in the automotive field and, you know, worked at Chrysler assembly plant. And he only had one hand. He had his both hands, but his one hand that's the only thing he didn't get back from being paralyzed. He got everything else back from being a double-tough son of a gun. But he worked through Chrysler, and he had a pension and so forth and so on. And to get a job like that now, you can't. So you have to work every day, and then you have, like they say, one person has an expense, a small expense. They can't afford it. So what now with Corona? You know, all these people there's going to be. There already is homeless everywhere you look. Homeless. So I drive a truck.
No, I'm with you, Ken, and you know, my dad had the same experience. He volunteered for the Army during World War II, went off to Japan. He got there just after the war ended, so he was part of the occupation forces. And he came back with the GI Bill. Mom got pregnant. He dropped out of college after 2 years, and he spent 40 years in a tool and die shop. And when he retired, he had a full pension. He had full medical.
And they could raise two boys.
My dad raised 4 boys. Yeah, same thing. Yeah. Ken, I got to move along, but you know, because we sound like a couple of old farts reminiscing. But hopefully, young people listening to us right now are getting the message that there was a time in America when rich people were still rich, and rich people were still doing okay, and corporations were insanely profitable, and we had a middle class. And Ronald Reagan and Reaganomics has destroyed that, and they want to keep it that way. And Joe Biden, he's giving a speech right now, and he's coming out and saying, no, we're going to fight for the middle class. We're going to bring back those kinds of jobs. We're going to put people back to work. We're going to give people decent wages, and we're going to make it happen. And I'm totally with him. Kirk in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Kirk, what's on your mind?
I'm hoping you'll take off on a fanciful flight of thinking with me for a minute, Tom.
Okay. Let's try it.
Let's say, and I know this may be pie in the sky, but let's say we expand our majorities in 2022 and then even further in 2024 to comfortable margins. Do you think it would be feasible and at that point a good use of our energy to start trying to impeach ALEC-funded and ALEC placed judges that go from the local to the SCOTUS that have really skewed the judicial branch in the last 10 to 15 years?
It's not ALEC, it's the Federalist Society, but I know what you're talking about. They're both funded by the Koch network. And so, yes. Here's how it works. If you're going, because we can't simply say, oh, Trump was illegitimate because the Russians helped him get elected or something like that, and therefore all his appointments are nullified. I mean, it's just never going to happen, as much as we can sputter about it. But to impeach a judge, you have to demonstrate really genuinely impeachable behavior. And I don't think we're anywhere close to that with any of the Trump judges yet. But there are a couple of dozen of them that when they were put through, the American Bar Association had rated them not just as not well qualified, but as openly unqualified, incompetent, people who had never before been judges. Amy Coney Barrett, who's on the Supreme Court right now, the first time she had a job as a judge was just the year before that. I mean, there are a bunch of these judges that had never been judges, and some of them had never even practiced law. Amy Coney Barrett never argued a case in a courtroom. So and so they were taking a lot of these corporate lawyers or brand new lawyers because they wanted all these young people to put them on the bench. So I'm assuming that there are organizations on the left and Ben Jealous, People for the American Way, for example, who we were just talking to, maybe one of them, who are kind of keeping an eye on what's going on with these judges. And when some of these right-wing judges start showing their colors beyond, like as in the flag that they're waving, right? Are they waving the maggot flags or are they waving the American flags? When they start showing their colors, their flags, then it's incumbent upon us to say, okay, if the decision is wrong, we'll fight that. There's nothing you can do about that. But if this judge is making this decision out of, for some reason that is not rational, that is not reasonable, that is corrupt, that they're making it because they have a long relationship with this company or they fail to recuse themselves, which has happened, by the way, dozens of times with Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito and back before he died with Scalia on the Supreme Court. When those kinds of things happen, then yeah, absolutely, I think we should be seriously talking about impeachment. Kirk, thanks for the call. Rick in Cartersville, Georgia. Hey, Rick, what's up? We have a minute to the break.
Okay, Tom, how you doing? I was wanting to disagree with you. Most of the time, I agree with you on everything, but quite often I have heard you talk about the stagflation during the Carter administration, and I can remember back that, of course, in '73, that during that was about the time, late '73, the oil embargo, that the economy pretty much tanked as a result of that. The long gas lines, prices started.
To your point, Rick, because we're going to run out of time here.
Well, what I was about to say is that during the Carter administration, that interest rates did rise some, but the income did as well. But by 1979, which was when I bought my house, my first house, the interest rate I paid was 12%.
Me too.
The year later, it was about 13%.
Yeah, we paid 13% on the house.
During the Reagan administration During the Reagan administration is when,
go ahead.
Reagan administration, it was when it was 18-20%.
ThomHartmann.com for audio and video.
Rick, I'm sorry, you just didn't have enough time for that thing. Give me a call back tomorrow, and we'll have a conversation about it. It's just it just wasn't enough time. We'll be right back. Typically, if I've got a minute and 20 seconds, I'll put somebody on the air and say we've got a minute, but I had 55 seconds there with Rick and I put him on the air, and I shouldn't have done that. I need to be a little more careful about that. It's a real challenge, watching the clock and doing the show and all this kind of stuff. But anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Dave, watch us on YouTube in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, I'll make this quick. I was unable to pay
my rent after April of 2020 for a while, and my landlord eventually got a judgment against me, even though there was a moratorium because I'm in a rent-occupied place, and also I didn't renew the lease, so I'm living without a lease. But fast forward, I got current on the rent about a month ago, and now I'm actually going to prepay the rent up to the moratorium, which in New Jersey is July 15th. I hired a lawyer, and now I'm told that he wants me out because I didn't pay the rent for a period in October, and I'm going to be evicted. And he can evict me because I'm in an owner-occupied residence. Now, I have the money to go and leave, but the whole point of the story is the reason I was able to catch up and pay my rent is because I work about 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I started a business. I taught myself search engine optimization. So I've done, even under Republican rules, I've done everything right, and I'm going to be asked to leave. Now, it's not a big. I'm grateful that I can go and find a place to rent. He dinged my credit with the judgment, which I had to get removed. But I can't even imagine people who can't pay their rent in New Jersey or anywhere else what they're going through. That's why I'm calling in. Because here I am, I can pay the rent, and I'm still going to get asked to leave.
Amazing. Amazing. Dave, thank you for sharing that story. It's one that I think a lot of Americans around the country are probably experiencing, and good on you. Thank you very much. Michael in Memphis, Tennessee. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was listening to you talk to Ben Jealous about some of the voter suppression laws they're passing, and it's going to be a domino effect. Here in Tennessee, state legislature just passed a bill, the same you can drive into a group of protesters thing. And I don't think people understand how important it is. I was telling the screener you got Joe Manchin in an interview with him with Chris. You just want to just punch the guy in the face because you can clearly see that he does not care. And you get people like him, Christian Sinema, and Ben Jealous said it. I mean, there needs to be tremendous pressure brought to bear on the president and Chuck Schumer to get these people in line. I don't get why the Democrats have to be so weak and soft when it comes to governing. I've never gotten it.
Well, it's because they're not authoritarians, but I agree with your point, Michael. And the comment line for the White House, by the way, is 202-456-1111. If you want to call and just raise hell and leave a message for Joe Biden, that's literally the phone number to do it. 202-456-1111. 202-456-1111. Good. Give him a shout, and hopefully a lot of other people watching will too. Michael, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching us there in Memphis, Tennessee. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Picking up your calls on the other side of the break. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? I'm sorry.
Good.
How you doing? That just sickens me about this thing in Mississippi, what I just heard with this Confederacy. And I think we ought to put the DOJ on. I think the Yankees won, so we ought to go ahead and make sure they know the federal government still can wield its power.
Yeah, I think that was Tennessee. You're talking about the guy who said that the legislature just passed a law saying that you can run into a crowd of protesters and kill people as long as you claim that you're, it's like stand your ground for a car, right?
Well, I think it's going to that part is going to backfire on the Republicans because in open carry states, Democrats can open carry. And we can, if they have to defend themselves against somebody trying to run them over, then,
right.
the people that have their weapons legally, it could turn into something like that. But
it could get real messy real fast. You're right.
Yes, it can. And Alex, one of your callers earlier, Alex, he took part of my message as far as what they're doing with the vaccines right now, how they're hoarding it, and it took government research, and development, to fund these big pharma. And I just think anything developed or invented or researched through government R&D should be community property or endowed to the commons, the regular people.
I agree.
Big and fossil fuel companies receive billions of dollars in subsidies, and it goes right back to campaign funds for legislators. So to me, that's like a kickback to legislators. That's actually legislators writing bills that's going to actually, recycle our taxpayer funding money back into their campaigns. And also, finally, I want to end lobbying as far as we know it. Lobbying, I think they should do whatever it takes to get their information out to the public and let us decide on referendums and, op-eds if they got to put it in newspapers. But let's stop money flowing from companies to legislators and let, that should limit.
And that's why I'm with you, Charles, 100%. And that's why we've got to blow up the filibuster. And blowing up the filibuster, as Ben Jealous pointed out, and, I had been thinking small bore up until my conversation with him today. I had been thinking we need to lean on Kyrsten Sinema and we need to lean on Joe Manchin. And I keep scratching my head trying to figure out, well, where do you get the leverage to do that? And he said, forget them. Lean on President Biden and on Senate Majority Leader Schumer. They have the power to dangle carrots in front of Sinema and Manchin or threaten them with sticks, right? Politically speaking. And so the phone number for the White House comment line, if you want to leave a message for President Biden and say, blow up the damn filibuster, end the filibuster, lean on Manchin and Sinema, get something done, damn it, is 202-456-1111. 202, like Washington, D.C., 202-456, like three numbers in a row, 456-1111. Charles, spot on. I got to move along here, Charles, but thank you for the call. Al in Minneapolis. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
How you doing today, sir?
Great. What's up?
Yeah, the reason why I'm calling, I'm going to make reference to the health. I remember back in the days, my mom worked in Rhode Island, and we used to work in the factory. I'm 65 years old. But we were making the $2.15 an hour. But we have Blue Cross, Blue Shield, everywhere you went. They were offering medical coverage. Until Ronald Reagan came and took over, and he just privatized everything, just broke everything out. There was only one Bell system, and that was Bell system, the telephone company. I mean, everything was okay until Ronald Reagan. I think the problem to me, I'm not an intellectual like you guys, but I listen to you religiously. The problem in this country is people worship people with money.
Yeah.
I keep hearing
it's sad, but
1%, 1% got billions of dollars. If they only 1%, then how come we, the majority, don't have a say?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's absolutely right, and again, I risk sounding like an old fart here, but I really think that for our younger listeners, and I know about half our audience is under 50, our younger listeners really need to know that there was a time in America where you could make things work. I started Terry O'Connor and I started a little business, an herbal tea business, literally in our house in the 1970s. And by 1975, we had 18 people working in our factory, which was in a big old, house in Okemos, Michigan. And every single one of them had full Blue Cross Blue Shield, and it cost me $30 per month per person. And I mean, that because the hospitals were nonprofit, Blue Cross Blue Shield in Michigan was required by law to be nonprofit. It was just straightforward stuff. Of course, $30 was a little more money back in the 70s, but and we paid good money. And it's just Reaganism has just gutted this country. And thank God Joe Biden is calling it out. He said it again just an hour ago. He said trickle down doesn't work. God bless him. He is so right. Hey, thanks for being with us today. We'll see you tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Be good to yourself and people around you, eh? See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.